Alright everyone, sorry for this late start. I was having trouble logging into Restream, but I'm logged in now. Also, I've got an extremely green background behind me, so I'm in the process of rearranging the studio. So things will probably, hopefully, looking more homey as time goes on, as I develop it, but I'm really excited because I'm in a new space, and it's pretty cool. All right, so I'm continuing to work on this guy right here. So let's pull up some reference. And I'm working on the abdomen here. Let's turn the old solo button, and let me see, am I using layers? Yes, I think so. And let's see. So I guess I was working on stripes last time, adding these kind of yellowed stripes as a separate poly paint layer. And let's see. Let's see. Oh, look at this one. This is kind of crazy. They're all kind of crazy. So that's bugs for you. And of course, I'm still dealing with this nasty cough. So let me load up my brushes. Let's see. I just had a couple paint brushes that I made in the past couple weeks. Let's make sure we have layers turned on. And I want to use this one. And let's see. I had it. I'm going to turn up RGB intensity. Set the focus shift down, bring down the size a little bit, and then tighten up the placement. So I get this kind of thing. I guess this one, I was using the one that had the noise in it, so let's try the other one. And this brush, if you recall from the last episode, I have some surface noise activated for it. So it's adding a little bit of procedural noise to the brush shape, which I think is really kind of cool. And so if I brush like that, I get that, but what I really want is more of this yellow. So I'm going to go into the brush, edit this, and maybe play with the color blend a little bit. So I think I'm going to play with the scale. Oops, that's not what I want. I want this. The other thing I could do is I'm going to go in here and under alpha and texture, I'm going to set the polypint mode to, let's try 4, which is lighten. No, it still looks the same. I think what I might do, let's go to the other brush, this one right here, and I'm just going to put an overall noise on here because I think that looks better. Right? That's what I was doing. So I'm just going to mask by noise. So go into surface, noise, and then up the scale a little bit, move this a little bit. Choose OK, and let's do mask by noise. Then I press Control H to hide the noise. Yeah, that works a little bit better. I'm going to go in here and edit this. Bring up the noise scale a little bit. Right, let's clear the mask. There we go. This real quick. I'm going to hold the Shift key and turn off Z add, so I just basically have a blur brush. I kind of make the stripes very bold because since I have them in a separate layer, I can always lower the layer strength later. And also I'm probably going to paint a few layers on top of this just to make it look a little bit more organic. And maybe instead I'll be a little bit loose with that. Looks pretty cool. I might make a dots layer on top of that, but I think what I'm going to do is do a little bit of a blend here. So I'm going to go to layers, add a new layer, and I'm just going to name this one blend. I'm just going to put some colors on top of those stripes just to blend them in a little bit more with the green. So I think what I'll do is go in here and maybe change the alpha to something like this and increase the placement a little bit and maybe select like a darker green, darker bluish green. Let's take a look at the guy as a whole. I kind of like how this guy looks, so I might select this green right here. And one thing I like to do every once in a while when I'm trying to match maybe another part of the model, I'm going to shift to this part of the model and just maybe draw it over here. And press Shift S, and that's going to drop it to the canvas. So you can see this has been dropped to the canvas. It's no longer a 3D model. It's just an image of the model, but I can use it as a way to sample colors and that kind of stuff. And also it's just as kind of a visual guide, so it could be a bit more consistent. So this has got kind of a brighter, lighter color on the stripes there. So what I might do is go in here to the layers. Let's go back to the stripes layer, set that in record mode, and I'll choose that lighter color and just kind of, let's clear the mask. Whoops, there we go. So I don't have a mask there anymore, so I can kind of brighten up parts of the stripes here, that paler color, and maybe make it a little bit less saturated. Now let's switch to color, that's the problem. Yeah, something like that. I'm doing pretty good. I'm still got the cough from last week. So I'm gonna, a virus that won't go away. But otherwise doing well. Hope everybody had a good Easter, celebrating it however you see fit. A lot of chocolate, that's how we celebrate, an awful lot of chocolate. Should get some chocolate crickets. I ate a cricket once at a bug fair, but I was not a fan. It kind of grossed me out. I know they were like a really good source of protein, and speaking in terms of ecology and conservation, like cricket flour is a way to go. But I can't get past the fact that I'm eating bugs. I don't know why. Actually, I'm not in LA right now, but the bug fair in LA should be happening sometime soon. It's usually a lot of fun. Los Angeles Natural History Museum. I'm going to turn down the color variation here. Get a little bit of too much of a psychedelic kind of thing going. Okay, well, few answers to your question there. Number one, poly painting's been around since before Mari, Substance, and all those other things. So I've been using poly painting for years and years and years. The other thing is I disagree. I've used Mari, I use Substance all the time. I like poly painting in ZBrush because I like the way the brushes feel. You have so many different options for alphas. Using the smooth brush as a blur brush, I think, works a bit better. You have masks, you have surface noise. I just like it. I use Substance as well, paint in Substance. But in terms of doing diffuse and albedo maps in ZBrush, Personally, I like it. You do have the limitation that it's dependent on the point count of your model. So your model has to be very, very high point count. Otherwise, your resolution is going to be very low. There's no reason you can't paint it in do a poly paint in ZBrush, export as a texture, and then bring that into Substance and paint on top of it. It's just another approach. And then, of course, you can use the PBR workflow, obviously, if you export this from ZBrush, and then, in Substance, use the other channels, metallic and so on. So I think it's definitely better than that. But I've been painting in ZBrush for a long time, so I just like the tools, and it's just another approach. I hope that answers your questions. You're probably going to disagree with me, but that's fine. It's like whenever I have somebody tell me that they really don't like ZBrush, or they like Blender better, or they like Maya better, or they like Blender better than Maya, or ZBrush better than this, I say, that's cool. But the other reason I'm poly painting, of course, is that I'm doing a ZBrush live stream. So if I was doing just my own YouTube channel, which is bloopatone, by the way, I would use more different softwares. But this is a channel that's devoted to demonstrating what you can do in ZBrush, and that includes poly painting. So I hope that answers your question. In the words of the almighty dude, that's just like your opinion, man. Yeah, I think my wife is really excellent at Substance. She does amazing things, and she does a lot of her painting in Substance. So she prefers that workflow. Like I said, I like to do painting in Substance as well. Things like decals and all that kind of stuff. Although I don't know, you can do a lot of really cool decals in ZBrush as well, using alpha and stencil and all that kind of stuff. I do think that the main limitation is so I have this model up at 2.8 million points, and really, if I want to have a high resolution poly paint, I would probably have to up it even more, higher than that, to really get a nice resolution out of it. Okay, so I'm going back to this layer, the blend layer, and yes, I know, thank you. Turn on record for polypaint. Let's see. There was a time when I had to paint all my gloss maps and spec maps in ZBrush. And, basically you're painting a black and white map. I'd convert, in some cases, the diffuse to a grayscale map, and then use that as a starting place for specularity or glossiness or whatever. And I would be like, man, I wish I could just see a decent preview of what this actually looks like in the spec channel, as opposed to having to guess. Those are the old days, the dark times. It's definitely nice to have have Substance and be able to actually finally get a good estimation or a good visualization of spec and roughness and all that kind of thing. There used to be a program way back in the days of Meta Creations. That's before Corel bought Painter and all that kind of stuff, and Painter was made by Meta Creations. Back in the days of 3D design, 3D Ray Dream Design Studio, before ZBrush even existed. And there was this paint program they had where you could actually paint on 3D objects. It was really clunky, but it was the only one that really existed at the time, unless you do vertex painting in like Maya or something like that. But I remember using it, and it was so close to being cool. But it's like it's hard to describe how incredibly clunky 3D tools used to be before the days of ZBrush. Like getting some of that blue in there. And then what I'll do is I'll do another layer for kind of these splotchy dots. Here's the other reason that I like to use polypaint in ZBrush, at least is doing like an initial pass. I'm not really demonstrating it on this part of the model, but I did on other parts in the previous live streams, is that I'll use a lot of like cavity masking and masked by peaks and valleys and smoothness and curvature and all that kind of stuff. And you can create some really cool masks that also can help you aid in the painting. It's just a nice little technique to play with. Bring up the RGB intensity a little bit. So sometimes that allows me to speed up the process, because I can use my sculpting, the input of my sculpting as part of the painting. What I do is make it more darker blue down here towards the end, so that there's a gradual transition to cooler colors across the top of the abdomen. Right now what I'm using is I have a paintbrush, and it's got the spray stroke on, color spray, and I've set the placement to like 0.43 and the color variation pretty low, and I've got a little dot alpha, and I'm just using kind of a dark color, but I'm painting at a very low RGB intensity on a layer on top of the other things that I've colored. So this it's not blurring it, it's just layering another color on top of what I painted. So if I turn the layer off, the visibility, you can see how I'm layering that color on top of it. And a lot of the painting techniques that I learned, I took a class a very long time ago at the Gnomon School in Los Angeles and Hollywood. Back when the Gnomon School consisted of 8 rooms. And it was Madeline Spencer who was teaching the class, and basically she was working at Gentle Giant at the time, and had come from a practical modeling background, practical visual effects. So the techniques that she was demonstrating were basically, she was going to ZBrush and using the techniques that she had learned from practical modelers and applying it to ZBrush. So just going over a surface with an airbrush, using different airbrushing techniques to paint directly onto latex. And so I'm using a lot of that kind of, my own version of that kind of technique in ZBrush to layer colors, so it's not just, so it looks organic. It looks like there's some depth to the color. It takes a while though before it really comes in, but that, you know, using the layers and then also using the smooth brush as a blur brush really helps out with that kind of thing. But what the smooth brush does is if you turn off Z add and just turn on RGB and move up the RGB intensity, that actually blends the RGB values and the pixels together. So it can really soften things. It can be a little bit subtle though. It's not too subtle. You can see it blurring there. I turn off lazy mouse. So if I do a blotch like that and then I hold the shift key and then paint over it, you can get a nice little blurring effect. So I'm going to set this to like a warmer green. And okay, so it's starting to look like something. Let's turn off the solo. I'm going to hit Control and turn off solo for a second just to see how it looks. And turn off dynamic. There we go. I think of definitely when we do the legs, I'm going to make them bright red like this guy, red and magenta. I still have to do the thorax, so that's a long ways to go. So what I'm going to do now is, I'll do it on the same layer. I'm going to do like a light yellow green here towards the bottom. Maybe bring up the RGB intensity a little bit more. Okay, curious about something. Oh, you know what's interesting is I'm wondering why I'm getting this kind of, see how it's not painting here, but it's painting here? It's because I left a setting on my brush settings. If I go down to brush and alpha and texture, yeah, I left my poly paint mode at lighten. So I'm going to set this back to normal. We got to pay attention to what you're doing with your brushes, but I kind of like this pattern here, so I'm just going to leave it and paint over it. Call it a happy accident. Yeah, blend it together. It looks kind of cool. This is the Pee Wee Herman. I meant to do that kind of thing. I'm not going to worry about this too much because this could be hidden by the thorax. Let's see. And I think what I want to do is I'm going to make some splotchy block dots. So let's do this. Just here in the corner. Shift S to drop it to the canvas. And then I'll Alt click on that to switch to that subtool. Let's make a new layer. We'll call it dots. And I'll keep on symmetry for the moment. Let's switch back to this square alpha, and that'll bring down the placement really low. And choose a really dark, almost black. And let's bring down the RGB intensity. It's too much. It's a bit fuzzy, so I'm going to bring out the placement a little bit. There we go. A couple other things you can do. You can go to the stroke palette, and then there's a couple interesting modifiers you could turn on here, like a little bit of stroke jitter and brush imperfections. And it's a bit too much. And then under brush, I have orientation. I'm going to bring the sprint center out a little bit. There we go. So we get something kind of blotchy. And then let's bring up the scale variation again. Sorry. And that's too symmetrical, so let's turn symmetry off. I know. I mean, the poly paint on here is not bad. The level of detail is not looking too bad, considering it's only 2 million points. I think it's just because it's really not that high detailed, or in terms of the poly painting, so you can kind of get away with more. I mean, this looks pretty good considering. I'm using a square alpha. It's still a little bit fuzzy around the edges, you know. I would subdivide this, but then I'd have to redo my layers, right? I think. I forget how friendly layers are with subdivision. So I'm going to kind of leave this the way they are for now. And I can always subdivide and paint on top of it. My reference is nice and blurry though. Go in here. I want a little bit more chaos in the brush. So I'm going to go in here and also bring down the flow. I haven't never tried that with poly paint, so we could try it. Let's see, if I subdivide this, let's turn off record mode. Okay, so I subdivided up to 11 million, and let's see, is it going to allow me to go into record mode again? Kind of interesting. Yeah, I just turned off record mode, subdivided it, and it seems to be working. So let's paint on it and see what happens. Yeah. I think what I'll do is speed things up, is turn on symmetry, just for when I'm painting here on the sides, because you can't see these both sides at the same time. And then just turn symmetry off as I get closer to the top. Navigation drives me crazy. That right click pop-up drives me nuts, because every once in a while I accidentally hit my button on my stylus, or I hit it when I'm trying to rotate, and that stupid pop-up comes up and drives me crazy. So I just disabled it. Yeah, you can recover a layer with a morph target, but I've got like 3 or 4 layers going on at the same time. So I don't know if I'd have to go and do the morph target for each separate layer or something like that. Okay, let's go over here. I'm going to turn off symmetry again, and get my blotches going, get my blotches on. painting dots, legendary black dots. Yeah, it looks pretty cool. Let's do some more down here. Let's get this going up here. Almost done with this pass of the dots, and I'm going to do the same technique I did last time where I duplicate the layer and then kind of use it to create kind of the effect of a bleed underneath this one, the way I did it on that one right there, using color masking. Let's turn on symmetry here and just do a few more little dots here and there. Okay, and then I'm going to take this layer and duplicate it. Let's turn this layer visibility off for a second. Put this in the record mode. And then I'm going to go down to, whoops, not polygroups, masking. I do mask by color, mask by polypaint. I'm going to select this dark color here. Oops. Let's bring the tolerance down. Try tolerance of 4. So you can see the mask is going on just a little bit beyond those sort of blotchy areas. We can add to this masking a little bit. Let's see. Let's do this one. I'm going to blur the mask. Okay. So I'm going to invert the mask here and just do kind of like pick maybe a dark reddish orange color and lower the RGB intensity and go in here and kind of fill this. So we get a little bit of that reddishness in here. do a mask adjust. Is this actually going to do anything? There we go. Yeah, I'm trying to create like a little bit of a halo just for fun. Invert the mask and hide it, and kind of fill that in. See if it's, is that making any bit? I don't want to chase that, I want this. There we go. There we go. So, and now what I'll do is I'm going to take that layer and let's lower the kind of sort of doing something. I don't know, kind of fun to play with. Yes, I know. He's all spotty. Before I move on to another part, let's just take another quick look at the abdomen here and see if we can. We got these stripes right here, which we could continue, but I think that's going to look like I don't know, too much of a grid. But instead of doing a stripe, like this guy just has brighter spots that almost look like a stripe, but they're not quite a stripe. I kind of like that. So we could go back to the stripes layer, set that in record mode. Let's save this guy real quick. Actually, you know what I want to do? Here's what I want to do. I'm going to lower the intensity of the stripes layer. Maybe something like that. Yeah, that looks good. And then I'm going to do new layer underneath that. I don't know, we'll just call it stripes too. And I'm going to turn on symmetry. And let's pick a nice light color. I use this other blotchy brush here. Let's make sure we're in record mode. Thank you. Just experimenting with the layers here. Kind of don't like that. Yeah, it is a melon. That's his name, Mr. Melon. I'm going to put this blend layer down here. Yeah, something like that looks pretty good. So what I think I might do is, rather than go to the thorax, which is going to be more the same, I want to do something interesting and maybe work on these hind legs a little bit, just to get something slightly different going. So it's just not a whole night of green blobs. Let's take a look at some of these legs and our katydids. A lot of greens and reds, magenta. That guy's crazy looking. That's a minion. Look at this one with the crazy black. I mean, this is awesome. But I think I'm going to stick to what I was doing. Oh, I love the pink on this one. Looks like candy. I like this design with the really bright yellow and green that fades into the orange and red and magenta. I think that looks really cool. And then we can have like a little black bits or darker bits in the stripes. So yeah, let's take a look at, I'm going to start the way I've done before, which is by laying down just kind of like a base color, and then I'll paint layers on top of that. And keep this off to the side for reference. And I'm going to cheat and use symmetry as much as possible. So this guy is 1.3 million points. So let's subdivide them up to about 5 million. That's pretty good. I'm going to check something real quick though. I feel like he needs I don't know, some level of detail or something. I don't have to overdo it. I'm gonna take this guy. This guy doesn't have a whole lot of detail on him. I think it's mostly the color. And I might just add just a little bit. I don't know. He needs a little bit of something. It's a little too soft for me. So maybe what I'll do is I'm just going to add a little bit of surface noise. I'm going to choose OK, and then I'm going to do mask by noise and hide it. And then maybe let's see. I just want to create a little bit of an edge to grab the eye. So let me make sure my smooth brush is back to being a smooth brush here. So I got a little bit of a noisy mask going, and then I'm just kind of drawing lightly over this and then smoothing it so it looks a little bit less than perfect, you know, a little bit more of a harder edge. I don't want to overdo it though, because I don't want it to be crazy levels of detail, just a little bit, so that it doesn't look so synthetic. I was watching a movie the other day, which I think is highly underrated. It's a DreamWorks Crudes. It's a really good movie in every aspect. And generally speaking, when it comes to CG movies, you know, CG cartoon movies, I like Illumination and of course Pixar. Although I feel like Pixar is constantly emotionally manipulating me. I mean, all movies do that, but Pixar just feels like sometimes when I'm watching a Pixar movie, you know, all the emotions seem so incredibly well designed, you know, the way they elicit them from you, that I almost feel like I'm a subject in a laboratory experiment. I know it's a weird thing to say, but it's just like Pixar and Disney is just sometimes they're just a little bit too perfect. I don't know, that's a weird thing to say, I'm sure. But I guess the way I put it is like sometimes I feel like the writers on Disney Pixar movies are consulting with a team of psychologists to try and figure out how they can milk as much emotion out of you as possible. And I'm sort of aware of that, and it bothers me. You know, it's like they don't feel like they succeeded unless they have you weeping by the end of it. Yeah, that's true. Colors in some butterflies are generated by the distance between their wing layers and not by a pigment. Because butterfly wings and moth wings are basically covered in scales, very tiny scales. And there's a number of reasons for these scales give an advantage. One of which is that if the butterfly gets caught in a spider web, it can wriggle itself out a little bit easier because of the scales are detachable. There's other things, like I think in terms of how they deal with sound and that kind of thing. the acoustics of flapping a wing with the scale can, I think, soften the sound. But yeah, they have basically the scales, the way that they're arranged and the way they're overlapping, can refract the light in a way that creates a lot of the colors. But I do believe that they also have pigments in those scales as well. With metallic bugs, you have basically layers of chitin, and the layers are three-dimensional. In other words, as each layer is being put on, they're rotated in such a way that as light penetrates and is reflected back in the environment, it's refracted, which gives it that metallic look. There's some really cool YouTube channels on this kind of thing, which are worth checking out. And of course, you got furry bugs too, that a lot of their, moths and butterflies can also be incredibly hairy when you look at them really close. I did let me see if I can pull it up, a while back, a model of a painted lady butterfly, and I used Yeti for the fur. And if you look at these things really close up, they're incredibly, incredibly hairy. So this was a painted lady butterfly that I did. I did the fur in Yeti and rendered it in Redshift for Maya. But you can see, like, I worked hard at trying to get the look of the tiny scales and the setae to create that kind of look. I think it came out pretty well. I'd like to get a chance to go back and redo it, but I do think the fur gives it a nice three-dimensional kind of depth to it. And in this case, it was nice because I poly painted the colors onto the wings, and I used substance as well for this. And for some reason, I decided to go for a really bizarre coloring in my ZBrush interface. I don't know what was going on back then. But that's a good example of like a combination of using both substance and poly paint together. And because especially in this one, the colors in the bottom of the wings are different from the colors at the top of the wings. So I had to have some thickness to the wings as well and split them up. But then also Yeti, I was able to transfer the colors from the texture map into the color on the hair, and I think it came out pretty well. I had to revisit this thing and maybe animate it at some point because it is rigged. It's rigged for posing, but not really for flying. But that was a really fun exercise. And then I have done a number of metallic bugs. This is Yeti fur. So this is a combination of shader and fur. I think it looks really good from like this distance. When you get closer, it doesn't look quite as good. But I think it does look good here on the face. And a little curlicue there. But then I've done a number of metallic bugs, and then one that I really liked that was fun to do was the heck, where to go? Rainbow scarab beetle, where are you? Ah, crap, I lost him. Well, this is the orchid bee. Is a nice example of sort of metallic coloring. And this has fur on top of it. Again, this is Yeti. But I always think is cool with these guys is that the metallic bits blend into the non-metallic bits, especially on the legs. It's a little bit hard to see here. An example right here. These are like non-metallic, and so they're a little splotchy. So that was an example where I spent a lot of time painting the metallic maps in substance to get that effect. Let's see if I can find, where'd you go, Rainbow Scarab? There he is. So this is a good example of metallic parts that blend into non-metallic parts, like along the edge here, right there. And then you can see it's almost like somebody went and spray painted this guy with metallic paint. But I spent a lot of time looking at these guys under a microscope. So really, like on the edge here, I really tried to pay a lot of attention to that, because in these non-metallic parts, there's also a certain amount of subsurface in there. This one doesn't have fur on it, but I think a later version does. Yeah, here's a nice close-up where you can kind of see those edges there fading into the metallic part. And again, the metallic quality is because of the way that the chitin it builds up layers as it's doing its exoskeleton between each molt. And so there's a lot of fading in there. And this is like really cool stuff that I think if you're doing aliens, you can really think about adding this kind of idea. The other thing I love about this particular beetle is you notice that the types of detail are very different depending on the part of the body. Like you have this squiggly kind of pattern on much of the exoskeleton, but then when you get into this horn, it suddenly turns into sort of a speckled dot pattern. So it's a different shape or detail language here than it is over here. And then as you look in the antenna, it's the same kind of thing. And of course the eye has the sort of the ommatidia pattern. And then I love about these guys is that half of the eye is underneath the shield here. These guys, I mean, the shapes, very fun to sculpt, but also a big challenge because they're this big, so you have to look at them under a microscope to really get that kind of thing. Yeah, the thin wall usually happens with transparency. For those bugs, I'll use the thin wall kind of, but you can have the same thing in Redshift as well, Redshift for Maya. I'll use that kind of effect on the wings to get sort of that slightly rainbow-like refraction that you see in the wings. Let's see, so I don't want to do too much here, but just a little bit of imperfections to make it look a bit more interesting. I use Arnold a lot as well, by the way. Arnold's a great renderer. I tend to use Redshift a lot, which I like. And I've used Arnold on a lot of projects. I used to be really into V-Ray, just haven't used it in a while. I was a big advocate of Octane, and I actually worked at Otoy. They make Octane for about excuse me, like 18 months or so when I was in Los Angeles, and that was fun. I learned a lot about GPU rendering from that company. You can still find, I still have a lot of tutorials online, Octane tutorials. But I like the integration of Redshift into Maya more than the integration of Octane. So I tend to use that more these days. When I was working on the planetarium show for Griffith Observatory, one of the great things about using Arnold is they have a built-in fisheye lens, which is just part of the software, and it's great because that's how we were able to render for a dome. We did 8K renders using the fisheye lens. The only problem was you couldn't see the fisheye lens effect until after it was rendered. So you had to animate in a 2D screen and kind of try and learn how to animate in a dome. And what made that difficult was the fact that it sounds easy, but it took weeks to get used to. If you're animating in a square, right, the bottom of the square in a dome is behind you, and the top of the square is in front of you, and the middle of the dome is right above, or the middle of the square is right above, or the rectangle. And that took a while to get used to. But it was very cool, but it was the only renderer that had that fisheye lens built in at the time. And so it ended up being the perfect one for a planetarium show. If you're in Los Angeles near Griffith Observatory, it's still playing. It's called Signs of Life. It's a really good show. Since it was created in Los Angeles, as you can imagine, a lot of the animators and artists who work in the show were also Hollywood veterans. So as compared to other planetarium shows that you might see like in New York or other parts of the world, the Signs of Life has got a very Hollywood feel to it, which makes sense because, you know, Griffith Observatory is right next to the Hollywood sign. All right, I'm just goofing around here. I'm not sure exactly what I'm doing. Let's play with the foot just a little bit. Just kind of want to accentuate some of this stuff. Yeah, I mean, you can use iridescence, but to really get that that quality, you want to use metallicity. Just like if you were going to render chrome, because that's exactly what it resembles. If you're trying to do like one of the super metallic bugs, like if you look at the golden scarab beetles, they look like gold. So I think bugs were among the first things that people used as jewelry. They just hang dead bugs all over your body, and you look nice and elegant. So I'm going to clear the mask here and just smooth it a little bit, and you just do that. Okay, it looks a little bit better. It's not quite as perfect as before. So now let's get back into coloring, painting. So I'm going to save. And since it's mostly red and orange, I'm going to put a base coat of red, and then I'll fade to the light green yellow here. And I'll probably, since it looks a lot like the wings, little itty bitty wings this guy has, I'll use a lot of that kinds of reds and oranges up here. So let's sample this red. I'm going to hover over this and press C for the eyedropper. And then let's choose color, fill object. And then I'm going to sample some of this orange here. And let's just do a little bit of goofing around here. So I'll go down here to masking, and let's do mask by cavity. And I'm going to hide that mask. Let's actually blur the mask. Hide it. And then I'm going to bring down the RGB intensity. Let's switch over to our paintbrush. Bring down the RGB intensity and just bring in a little bit of that orange color there. Something like that. Let's clear the mask. Mask by curvature. grow that mask, invert it, hide it, pick a very dark color, and just bring that in there real quick, like that. And then mask by peaks and valleys. So let's hide that mask. Sorry, invert that mask, hide it, and then just a little bit more of that dark color. We're going to paint on top of it, so it'll be hidden somewhat. But although you can see that it's pretty dark right here. It's like some weird leftover piece of geometry. And I'm going to delete that. Now what I want to do is I want to paint some yellows and greens towards the bottom here. Well, this part. I suppose we should do that with a layer. So let's go in here and create a layer. We'll call this greens. And I'm going to pick this yellowish green right here. Now, let's see. I didn't like that. Let's not hide anything. I'm going to switch over to this alpha and get a little bit more greenish kind of color going there. can bring up the RGB intensity a little bit. This may take it a little bit too long here. Sometimes it looks like crap for a while until you get it going the way it needs to go. Get some darker greens going here. And blur this a little bit. Work on the transition. This is going to be like a back and forth, because of course you're transitioning from green and yellow into red, so it's not quite but almost complementary colors here, so it's a little bit of a tricky transition. I'm going to select that reddish color, start to blend here. And kind of do like a back and forth here between the greens and the reds. I mean, it's like it's abrupt, but it's not abrupt, you know what I mean? Part of it that makes the transition interesting is also these other details on top of it. And then we've got a certain amount of noise in here as well. So right now this is just a base color. I'll add the noise as a separate layer in that transition. I like to have a little bit of splotches of reds and oranges down here too, so it's not in one single color. Let's go into here, play with this a little bit. And I think it's going to look cool when it gets there and add some more vibrant colors. You know, add some of this bright red in here as well. So now it's starting to look a little bit better. Let's fight back with some of this yellowy green. Interesting. I'm kind of just experimenting with where exactly I want the transition to be from that green to the red. And I think I want to do is bring a little bit of yellow. Like you can see the yellows appearing here on this part of the leg. So I'm going to bring that in as well. And then I want to bring in some of this like bright cherry red. That's pretty cool. All right, so what I think I'm going to do is leave it there for tonight. And the next week, come in and start adding some of these details here to the legs. And I need to, this I think has gotten a little bit too far away color-wise from some of the greens in here, so I need to bring some of that green back into parts of the leg. And it's kind of a tough balance, but it's kind of fun too. You know, I need to make this, find some kind of harmony between the wings here, the legs, and also the head. Maybe bringing some of that magenta in here as well, and just balancing those out with also the types of greens, you know, some of the cooler greens maybe in here as well. So the legs are going to be kind of a fun challenge to get the colors the way that I want, but they're not too far off. I mean, you can see how there's a consistency between the palps here and some of the colors in here as well. So just need to bump them up a bit and play with a bit more blending, and then adding some detail on top of that, and then we'll get something that starts to look like this. Where this will look really nice is you know, exporting these and then plugging them into subsurface and transparency, or sorry, transmission channels in like Redshift or Arnold or something like that, and get some really nice, really cool looking stuff there. Thanks for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. Sorry for the late start. I hope to see you guys next week. And this guy's coming almost there. Just going to do these legs, thorax. Excuse me. And a few more bits back here. And he'll be colored. All right. See you next week.